So I spoke a year ago at the same conference. I think in the last year, quite a lot has changed. So small piece about myself. So I'm Paul Steckler. I manage basically international markets for Canopy Growth. So everything outside North America. So our main sites, I guess, are Germany, Poland, Australia, UK, and Czechia. So I'm going to just rattle through a quick summary of how I see the industry, how it's evolved over the last year. So I'm going to quickly get into it. So a small piece about Canopy Growth. Many of you would have seen, I'm not going to avoid the subject, many of you have seen the news recently about the changes that we've made at Canopy Growth. They've been fairly significant. I think it's fair to say Canopy, like much of the industry, we've not been immune to the macroeconomic environment, and that also topped with an industry that is frankly facing quite a lot of challenge and has seen a lot of bad news probably in the last kind of 6 to 12 months. I then want to talk about the year of change, some of the key things that have happened, I guess, in the last year since I spoke a year ago. Of course, one of the major things is a year ago, I guess many companies were like hyping the German recreational opportunity. A year later, I guess we all see that it's not what we expected. I then want to talk about responsibility. I think the industry, a year ago, I stood in this same room, and I think I told the industry then that I didn't think we were doing a very good job of being responsible or collaborative. A year later, I don't think much has changed, so I want to talk about that. And then lastly, I want to talk about the future. I think it's still positive, but I think we've got some work to do. So a bit about Canopy. I'm not going to go through this slide. It's very similar to one I shared last year. Some of the numbers have obviously changed. So I think Canopy Growth is obviously a world-class CPG company. Those of you who know Canopy will know we were the first licensed North American company, first federally licensed in Canada. We've evolved a lot over the last few years. I've been with Canopy for 4 years, so I've seen a lot of change in that 4 years. Our strategy remains clear, it remains the same. I guess some of the core tenets of that strategy, one is we need to be successful in the US. So we've set up, we released an announcement the other day that we obviously are looking to set up Canopy USA. So we will have a US company, US entity to look after the businesses that we have in the US. We have some leading brands in the US. So one of the brands is our gummy brand, and we have Jetty, which is our vape brand. Second thing for us, which is really important, is becoming profitable in Canada. And I think that's the same for much of the industry. There aren't that many companies that have managed to reach profitability. And that's really important, not because being profitable is a great thing for any business. It's kind of a necessity to run a successful business and for us to continue to be successful. And of course, the other piece is around the business I look after. So the international business, we've actually been profitable for a while as a business, but we're looking to continue to grow, and we're looking to continue to expand across the world. So a little bit about the last year. I'm going to touch on each of these so the first thing to say is, if we look at outside of North America, we are primarily talking about medical cannabis, and we are talking about medical markets. The positive news is the medical markets outside of North America continue to, in fact, even in North America, continue to grow. We've seen really good market growth in Germany. We're seeing good market growth elsewhere. We've seen the Australian market explode probably in the last year. Similar themes in Poland. Anyone who's looked at the Polish data will know that the Polish market has also exploded. So the interest in medical cannabis has continued to grow, and the markets continue to grow. However, when you look at the numbers of patients in each market, it's still significantly lower than the market potential. So even in Germany, which is one of the major medical markets globally, the number of patients in Germany is still, I would say, 10% of where it could be. So there is still something about the fact that the industry, we still compete against each other aggressively in some cases, particularly in Germany, but we don't grow the market. So that is one of the challenges, I think, moving forward. I said the same thing a year ago. And the behavior we're seeing from companies, and I am going to pick on Germany as an example. We have a lot of companies in Germany. The behaviors we see from some companies, I would say, is not that behavior that we would want to see in a traditional pharmaceutical industry. You wouldn't see it, in fact. So we're seeing very short-term focused businesses with very short-term execution. That's leading to an industry in Germany that frankly isn't as attractive as it maybe was 2 years ago. So I think it's a real problem, and I think the market will continue to grow, but I don't think the industry will necessarily grow with it unless companies start changing the way that we behave. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail when I talk about responsibility. German recreational, obviously there was, you could argue, too much hype last year, and clearly companies wanted to generate investment. There's a lot of discussion about domestic growth, And let's grow. That's what a lot of companies were pushing for, domestic growth, for some obvious reasons. And here we are a year later, and domestic growth in Germany from rec looks like people having a few plants in their kitchen. Frankly, that's where we've ended up. So, and I'm probably using the extreme example, but the reality is the efforts the industry made to generate a recreational legalization in Germany have been quite unsuccessful. I think if we can all see the results and what's happened, and we're 5 years away from, probably at least 5 years away from a true commercial market in Germany. The pilots don't look well thought through. The cannabis clubs are certainly not well thought through. In fact, I'm hearing anecdotally that the only people applying for licenses to grow as part of the cannabis clubs are actually illicit dealers. So so it is really a problem that it's not been well thought through. It's definitely less ambitious than we'd hoped. So it's positive that there is movement in Germany. It's positive that decriminalisation is happening. So that's positive for people who need to access cannabis. It's disappointing that it's a lot less than we expected and hoped for. So, and I think we as an industry should take some accountability about our behaviour, because regulators, governments look at the industry, they look at how we behave, and I say we as in companies in general. And if we don't behave to the letter of the law, if we don't behave appropriately, then it's not a surprise that maybe governments and legislators and the EU maybe not as positive about cannabis as we probably are. So I think we have some work to do. Third piece, anyone in Germany will know about the GBA decision. So there was a big risk that the GBA would restrict particularly cannabis flower usage in the medical market. Good news is that ended up not actually making any real change, which was extremely positive for the industry in Germany. I've said customer voice in Germany is important. My belief that the GBA decision that became positive came from the pharmacy voice, actually. I think it was a pharmacist who pushed really hard to make sure we didn't see any changes. It wasn't necessarily industry groups. I think it was pharmacy that managed to make that happen, and patients. So I think that reminds us that actually when we have good advocates in the healthcare professionals and patients, it makes a difference. So I think for me that was a good example. But one of the key things, we've done some, obviously we're always doing market research. This is a snapshot of some research that we conducted, just to look at, when you look at the three core groups, this doesn't include obviously government officials and state, but it does include healthcare professionals, so doctors, pharmacists and patients. I'm not going to go through, I think you can all access the slides after, I'm not going to go through each point. What I would summarize is what is clear on the left, which is really positive, is, and this is the same in all pharmaceuticals, when you bring out new innovations, the early adopters, whether they're doctors, patients or pharmacies, are usually the forward-thinking people. They're the first people who buy an iPhone, the first people who buy an Apple Watch, etc. The kind of people who want new technology, they think it's interesting, they think it's exciting, and they're willing to push the boundaries and take risks to do the right thing with the future. So that's the positive stuff on the left. What we're seeing, so there is recognition that cannabis, A, is a very good therapy and there is belief in it. B, that actually it has a place in pharmaceuticals. But on the right-hand side, the issues we're seeing, the reason I think we're seeing less patients in the market than we might hope for, is the barriers to access are high. So for a doctor, if we take Germany as an example, the paperwork, the bureaucracy involved in getting reimbursement is quite painful, and many don't know how to do it. The second piece is, of course, with reimbursements. We know that only about half of patients in Germany actually get reimbursed. And an interesting statistic for all of you to think about it. So if you look at Germany, the average patient, the moment a patient thinks about medical cannabis as an option in Germany to the day they get reimbursement, on average, is a year and a half. So you think about that. You're a patient with chronic pain. You've been suffering for many years. All traditional pharmaceuticals haven't worked. So you're what we'd call kind of a last resort patient. Suddenly someone tells you about medical cannabis and you say, great, I'll go to my doctor. It then takes a year and a half till you get an actual prescription and it gets reimbursed. So that's an average. So clearly there are patients who get access quicker and there are patients where it's even longer. So that's a huge problem for us as an industry, because that delay is a significant revenue opportunity and it's a significant issue for patients as well. The other piece around here is the lack of awareness of different products. So we have, I'm not going to quote the number of flower products on the German market now. It's significant. It changes I think it changes every week when I look at registrations. But there are so many products. 2 years ago there were a limited number of products on the market. Now there are many different flower varieties. Some of them are just kind of, I'm not going to say they've been dumped on the market, they're launched without education. So pharmacists see all these products come into the market, they don't understand the difference between some of these products because they're not being explained other than they've been discussed about price and price only. So that lack of awareness causes problems because patients end up at a pharmacy who has limited understanding of narcotics, limited understanding of cannabis. And then when you look at patients, of course, there is, if you read the media and read about cannabis, you'll see different things in the media. One, most patients don't know the difference between CBD and THC. So many people talk about medical cannabis, they think of CBD you can buy down the health shop, which of course is completely different. But that lack of information in the media means that people don't understand, and therefore there is a lack of trust in both the product and the industry. So, and that's something we need to address. So I put a couple of quotes which I'd ask you just to have, you can read. I'm not going to read them out, but you can read them for yourselves. And the reason I use these two examples is because anyone familiar with Patagonia will know that it's a brand that's been built with a clear purpose. So the people who buy into brands like Patagonia buy into them because they believe in that purpose. And in reality, Patagonia have been extremely successful, not because they've had this, we must become profitable, or we must, they just want to do the right thing. People believe in that and the money has followed and they've become a very successful business. And you can see a similar quote from the CEO of Whole Foods as well. So when you think about cannabis and what we're doing, and we're at the forefront of basically a new medicine, which, if we've been really honest, traditional pharmaceutical companies don't really like. The thought that a flower, a plant, can change people's lives, is quite scary to big pharma, potentially. But however, unfortunately, the industry at the moment, and Canopy, we're similar, we have to become profitable, that's a necessity, but the industry has lost its focus on purpose. We've lost our focus on why we do this, why I get out of bed every day. So it's when I see patients where we've made a real difference, and we still know there are many patients across the world who could really benefit from our products, but we've lost sight of that. I think if you go and interview some pharmacies in Germany and ask them what's the experience you have of the industry, I don't think they'll say, oh, it's an industry where all you talk about is patients and patient benefits. I don't think that's what they would say. I think they would say it's an industry trying to make money, it's an industry trying to become profitable, it's an industry that constantly talks about investment and and trying to do things and trying to make more and more cash. It's not an industry that really thinks about patients. And I know that's not the case for all companies, and certainly not the case for the people in the room, I'm sure, but it is the perception of this industry at the moment. And my challenge to the group is that is what we have to change. I said the same thing a year ago, and 1 year later, nothing has changed apart from actually, and you take Germany's become a more negative environment than it was a year ago because legalization is not happened as we expected. We're seeing further challenges on reimbursement. So reimbursement of flower products is going down, not going up. So patients are finding it harder in Germany to get reimbursed, and that is a real problem. So I think for me, I'd challenge everyone, if you're a leader, if you're running a cannabis business, think about why you're running that business. And if you're running it to make profits and to, increase your share price and to make a quick buck, then possibly you may get there. But I would challenge you that I don't think the industry will be successful if we all have that same attitude. I think the industry has to be successful if we all have the same purpose. And in medical cannabis, it's very much about giving patients the best opportunity for success where they haven't had success with traditional medicines. And in recreational, yes, when we have legalization, when we have a market where there's recreational products, that's about helping people who deserve to have the choice to access cannabis without having to buy it illegally and fund organized crime. So for me, there are two very clear purposes of why I do my job that we should be talking about all of the time. It's something I do with my team internally. We talk about the vision for us internationally, what we want to do, what we want to achieve, and we talk about that vision in every meeting that we do so that the teams really believe in what we're doing as a purpose. Numbers are important. We have a business to run. We've got to be profitable, yes, but that has to be secondary to the purpose. So the future, I hope this has not been a really negative presentation. I would hope this is the future how I'd like it to be. I guess one is that it's a cohesive and collaborative industry. So when I say collaborative, I think we're very good at networking drinks. We're very good at patting each other on the back, saying how well we're doing. We're not very good at being honest with each other. So I think we should be more honest as an industry. When we are networking, every time I meet people, everyone always tells me how wonderful their business is doing. The reality is, I think, I know we all have challenges. None of us are doing wonderfully well. If we're all doing wonderfully well, I'm afraid you look at the share prices of all the whole industry, the cannabis industry in general, and see that values have decreased significantly in the last year to 2 years. So we are not doing wonderfully well. We have a better job to do, and we have to improve that. So that means being honest with each other about actually how do we work together to build an industry. Longer term gain, so it's thinking about what do we want the industry to be in the next 2 to 3 years, because actually legalization is not as close as we thought it was a year ago. Given that, we have to think longer term. How do we plan for that legalization, and how do we make sure governments across the world believe in what we're doing? So actually they're pushing that door to make it happen, rather than finding reasons for it not to happen. And then the other one around governments and regulators, they want to learn from us. I don't know that there are many, and I know our industry groups are doing the best job they can, but the reality is I don't see governments knocking on our door to say, we need your advice. We need to speak to the experts, and we need to get to that position where they are. And then finally, I think we need appropriate normalization of cannabis. Cannabis is still not seen as a normal therapy. Recreational cannabis is still not seen as an option for people. It's still seen as a drug. And we have to change that. That's a much longer term vision for me, that actually eventually cannabis and cannabis brands become normalized. So when you are a patient, you're not having to hide your medicine, you're not having to vape away from your work colleagues, you're not having to, so that's the thing we have to change. And I think that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.